Our podcast is about your journey in music and how you got to where you are now. And I know you've just put a record out, so we'll talk about that as well.
Yeah, right on. What a
Cool.
journey it's been.
Yeah, so you're currently in Nashville?
Yep, that's right.
Right on. Where are you born and raised there?
I was not born here. I was born in New York City. My parents are, my mom's a lifelong New Yorker. My dad's from Massachusetts, but lived in the West Village for many, many, many years. And then when I was, I think I was 4 years old, 82, we moved down to Nashville.
Oh, wow.
And
So you're pretty much grown
I
up
was raised,
there.
yeah, I was raised here in this, and back then Nashville was not what it is now by any stretch of the imagination. So it was it was this small southern provincial town, and I was sort of raised in a little microcosm home with New Yorkers back in the day when Nashville was super super southern.
Wow, that's interesting. We're
Yeah,
actually we're moving out there. We're gonna be here there this weekend to look at the
nice.
property and stuff. Yeah.
Oh,
Down in
congrats.
Spring
Killer place
Hill.
to live. Yeah,
So,
killer place to live.
do you know much about Spring Hill? Is it
Yeah. Yeah. I had a friend in high school, like junior high and high school, who lived in Spring Hill. And back then, again, like late 80s, early 90s, Spring Hill was a super small town and there was not much there. It was just farms.
Oh, wow,
Um,
that's interesting.
yeah. And now it's become like this thing. It's like its own city.
Yeah, we've heard it's like really getting big. We've actually never been there, but we're moving, man. We're ready.
Righteous. Have you been to Nashville proper, like downtown Nashville?
No, no, this is going to be
Oh,
a whole new experience for us. We've never been to
wow.
Tennessee, but we're just we're moving out there, man. That's where it is. That sounds like
Dude,
that. We're really excited.
congrats. Nashville's a great place to live. Great place to live.
That's
You have
awesome.
kids? You plan
Yeah,
on
we
having
do.
kids?
We have two
Okay.
kids, so
Yeah, perfect. So Nashville is a great place to raise a family.
that's amazing. Yeah, well, we've heard like Williamson County is kind of like the spot for like the school district that you want to be in. So that's where we're aimed to be. So that's where we're gonna be moving to. So we're excited.
Yeah, killer schools in Williamson County
That's
for
awesome.
sure. Yeah,
That's
man,
awesome
right
that
on.
you're there. So it's super exciting. Well, how did you get into music? I mean, you must have been surrounded by it in Nashville.
Yeah, for sure. So when I grew up, I started. Um, I think most kids are intrigued by music when they first actually start hearing it,
Hmm.
and I certainly was no exception. I started off on the drums, like I wanted drum lessons, and I started taking drum lessons at a young age. Shortly after that, a buddy of mine and I, who actually was the producer on this album that just came out today,
Oh, wow.
we started writing songs together in my parents' basement, and so after a few years of that, and like we started our bands in junior high, and went through like several iterations of that. And
Sure.
as I got more serious in high school, the guy who was the drummer in our high school band, his father, as is with a lot of our friends, his father was a studio musician who was playing drums on all the big Shania Twain albums and Garth Brooks,
Wow.
and they had moved to Nashville from LA around the same time we did, moved down from New York. And so out in LA, he had already had an illustrious career of like he played on the Star Wars soundtracks
Oh
and
my
like
gosh.
he did all this amazing stuff. And so when I was in high school, by way of his son going to my school and being the drummer in our high school band, when he saw our love for music, he tried to help foster that. So he would take me down to Music Row sometimes, and they would let us sit in on sessions, and we'd watch like him and Mutt Lang and whoever it was, playing guitar and drums and keys and bass and stuff like that. We just sit in the corner and watch, and you can imagine for like a 14-year-old 15-year-olds watching that stuff go down in real time with the big mixing decks and the beautiful lighting and
Sure.
everything's multi-million-dollar studio. You kind of get entranced by that, and it becomes this sort of like alternate dimension
Hmm.
that you hope one day you get to like live in and work in. And so that's where it really started. And then Nashville's a songwriter's town, so my focus pretty quickly kind of turned from drums into songwriting and guitar. And I've ever since then, I've just been enamored with the whole process of writing songs and what you
That's
can
amazing.
discover in that. So that's how kind of that all started is like a byproduct of my mom was a writer, a poet, and then being surrounded by the industry, it just kind of got its hooks in me early.
That's amazing. Well, you were a drummer in the beginning, but you talked about when you were in bands in high school and stuff. You were what, the frontman, the guitar player?
No, yeah. So my first few bands, I played drums,
Mm-hmm.
and I was the drummer in those bands. And then I switched to guitar like in the second half of high school, in terms of the band where I wasn't playing drums anymore, but still it was like, rhythm guitar / a little bit of lead guitar, but would not sing. I didn't think I could sing. I would ever have a voice for singing, so I refused to do it. It wasn't until after college in my 20s that once I had kind of gotten down into another level of studying the craft of songwriting, and I started really getting into like the Texas guys, Guy Clark and Townes Van Zandt, and obviously I was discovering John Prine and the deeper cut side of Bob Dylan's catalog that wasn't just like the
hits,
the Blown in the Wind and stuff like that. Even though those are amazing songs too.
Yeah, sure.
But I was the point of that was I started really getting exposed to songwriters that weren't great singers, that weren't like known for their vocal prowess. Leonard Cohen, another example. I started hearing him, and it was like the writing is insane, but like I could sing like that guy. Like that's not like he's kind of talking.
Right.
And and so I found my way into trying to sing and stuff in my mid-20s, inspired by those guys that were, they weren't Porter Wagner and Dolly Parton and Charlie Pride, like people with these gorgeous angelic voices that
right,
could make you cry by the way they sang. Vince Gill's another one whose voice is just like the sweetest sounding thing you've ever heard. And I knew that was never going to be me. So, Townes Van Zandt and Leonard Cohen and Prine became really, really big doorways into the world of lead singing.
Sure. Wow. So that was, you said, around college when you started taking that?
Yeah, that was like early mid-20s, like 22, 23, 24, as I really started trying to sing for the first time. And I was so terrified by it. Like I would only do it in my apartment with my recorder, my digital recorder, which at the time, in those days, like 2001, 2002, like digital home recording was not what it is now. There was no GarageBand. There was no, I had a Roland VS 1680 that we had bought with our band. That was like this desktop digital recorder that, now kids would look at that and be like, that's garbage.
Right.
But it's all we had. And we had to save up for a long time to get it. But I would only do it in my apartment alone, and I would only let myself listen to it. I wouldn't let anybody else hear it. It was years before I got the courage up to step up on a stage in front of people and actually sing into a microphone.
What was that like? Like, was there a moment that you just decided, what, I'm just going to go for it?
Yeah. So I was in a band at the time, again, with the guy that produced this latest album, and I wrote a song, and I was just kind of like, I want to try singing this one. And, so we were playing at this little club where we played, and it really, there wasn't any like super secret thing. I just got drunk and
went for it
and just went for it. Yeah. I'm sure it was terrible. I'm sure it was utterly horrible, but when you're first finding your voice, like you're imitating vocalist styles that you like, and there's nothing original about what you're doing, and it sounds really horrible, so that was the beginning of it. And then over time, as you grow up and mature, I kind of slipped in, I think like a lot of people do, into like, well, this is how I sound, this is me just kind of singing without trying to sound like anybody else. Or
sure. Yeah, it's a lot of people I think have that same thing. You hear a band you like, or whoever it is, you're gonna just try to imitate or mimic what they're doing, because you think that's how you're supposed to sing. But
that's
totally
right.
Different. Yeah,
that's right. And I think that's normal and healthy. And I think the same holds true for writing styles, and lyrics and songwriting. You latch on to those writers that really inspire you, and then you spend years trying to carve your own voice out of the early imitations of those people that you do. But that's how you learn the craft. You study the greats and you mimic them.
Yeah, and take what you can, and like that's how all art is, right? It's all different. You take bits and pieces from other influences to create kind of your own your own
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah, for sure.
With your band, you said you were doing that in college. You're writing and recording stuff. Were you like, was that kind of the dream, was to be an artist, a touring artist, or is that what you're going to school for, music?
No, I didn't study music in school because I I was one of those idiotic uh people who thought, oh, music theory. I'm like, I don't need to learn that shit, and
Yeah.
I was real like, all I need is, three chords and the truth. And
I
um
love that. Yeah.
so I didn't study music, but what I did go into studying was poetry, because I just have a real passion for the written word,
Hmm.
in literature in general, and poetry. I've always read it and I've always written it, and had always written it up to that point, and it made sense. It dovetailed nicely into songwriting, and so I went and studied poetry in college. But the dream at the time with all of us in the band was, yeah, to like, get on the road and like, be a rock band.
Hmm.
Um, and we did it for several years. We never did a label deal or anything, but the band didn't make it past college because our drummer joined the Air Force. And then me and the other writer, singer, and the keyboard player kind of stayed together, and then eventually, went down our solo musical paths. But we're still great friends. All three of us live in Nashville, and all three of us still make music and play music in different capacities. So it's, it was definitely a lifelong commitment.
Sure, that's cool. And you said your mom was a poet. That kind of tie into why you decided to go that route?
I mean, I'm sure it did. Growing up at Christmas and birthdays, I was always getting poetry books from her as gifts,
Mhm.
and she appropriately didn't hit me with the heavy stuff at a young age and gave me the stuff that was sort of accessible and easy to read and digest, and I was inspired by it. And reading Rumi, and I've always kind of gravitated towards the romantics, and so I loved the simplicity of what was written on the page and how much emotion it contained, those simple words, and that really drew me to it, I think. And I think that's still like a huge part of the journey, is learning how to capture such greatness in such simple and and what most people would say is just sort of like ordinary language. But you can, the art is like filling that language with beauty.
Mhm.
It's a really cool, crazy art form.
Sure. And you recently put out a children's book, correct? Was that kind
I
of
did,
influenced
yeah, I
by
did
what you
earlier this year. I put out a kid's book. That was the first one I've ever done, and I've always wanted to do it. I've read thousands of them. When I graduated high school, I took a job in the summer before I went off to college at a childcare center at Vanderbilt Hospital,
Oh, amazing.
and I was a co-teacher, assistant teacher to the woman there in a toddler room. And so we had 10 kids between the ages of 12, 13 months and 22 months.
Mhm.
And it's a total zoo, but I love children. I always have. It, I still to this day say that it was the best job aside from the job I have now. It's the best job I've ever had. And so I loved it so much. I went back every summer during college. And then when I dropped out of college for a couple of years, I worked there full time for those 2 years. And then, so all in all, I worked there off and on, part time, full time, from '96 to 2004, so almost 8 years.
Wow.
And I learned just endless amounts about children and raising children and caring for children. And obviously, you're reading kids' books all along the way.
Right,
And
right.
and so I'd always wanted to write one or do like a series of kids' books. And my friend Mary Gaucher, who's a songwriter here in town, um, several years ago, I think maybe 10 or 11 years ago, she wrote a children's book, an autobiographical children's book, called The Foundling.
Mhm.
That was like a companion piece to an album, a concept album she was doing called The Foundling.
Oh,
And
cool.
and so she asked me to help edit that book and work on it with her as she was finishing up the manuscript. And so that really got me being like, oh yeah, I forgot I've always wanted to do this. And so
Mhm.
years later, I finally got around to doing it and finally got it
Do you
out.
have children? Is that or is that what you wrote it
I,
for, or
I do.
just
Yeah. I have two kids. I have a 14-year-old son and a 2.5-year-old son.
Oh wow, how funny! Because we have a 12-year-old son and a 4-year-old son, so
Oh
pretty
yeah, right on.
similar distance
Similar
between the
gaps.
two. Yeah, that's
Yeah,
amazing.
yeah.
Well, when you're working with the children, did you go in and play guitar or anything to them? Because I know that's kind of a big thing with people as far
I
as
did. I went in
preschool.
and sang to them a few times. Mostly, actually, what they liked more than the guitar was days I would bring in my djembe, my hand drum,
Oh,
and
really?
they get to beat and bang on the hand drum and dance around.
That's
Yeah.
cool. That's funny. We got our 4-year-old like kind of in the midst of COVID. He, it was tried to hard to get him. He's wild, so it's like he needs to get his energy out. So we bought him an electric drum kit,
Oh,
so
cool.
he can put the headphones on and hear the smashing. But it's like,
Yeah,
to us,
super
it's just
quiet.
like, yeah, and it's amazing. He's getting a kick out of it. Once we get out there, I want to see if I can find somebody to give him some lessons because I'm not a drum. I can't play drums. I can play guitar chords but I'm no musician in the sense of the word. But like, I'd love to have him learn drums, and I'm sure there's millions of people out there that can teach him.
You will 100% be able to find him someone that can teach him drums.
That's awesome.
There's
Very
there's
cool.
100% positive assurance of that.
That's amazing. That's good to know.
Yeah.
So very cool. So yeah, so you were able to write this book, and were they kind of an influence for it?
I think they're just inspiration to like get it done. Like having kids in the home, like I always just like, you need to do this. The content of it, not so much a direct inspiration. I tried it's about, kind of that personal discovery of finding what it is or where you go to look for your own uniqueness. And so it's a pretty universal journey, right? It's pretty kind of archetypal subject to write about, self-discovery. So I wanted to keep it wide like that, as opposed to like honing in on like something that was specific to my family. But having them around was definitely an inspiration and a reminder to like, you got to finish that project, Matt. Get on it.
That's awesome. So you put out was your first solo record in 2017? Was that the first one you did?
That's when I released it, even though it was recorded in 2010.
Oh, wow. Well, so you recorded the record then, and why'd you hold on to it for so long?
Well, it's a really crazy story. So in 2010, my first son was 4 years old. I was still performing a lot. I had really, really dialed it back, but I was still performing, and I cold called a guy in town, who is a really, really legendary producer. His name was, I was producing a show at this club downtown called Third and Lindsley, which is it's a really nice, beautiful, like, 500, 600 cap room, with tables. And back then it was like a 250 or 300 cap room, maxed out. It was a really cool club though. And I was producing a show there that was sort of billed as an Americana variety show. And I was hosting it, and I had a bunch of different acts, and each one would get up and do a couple of songs. And so I was looking for a headliner, and I called up this guy who I admired deeply, by the name of Cowboy Jack Clement. And he had just a storied, epically iconic career, probably of an artist slash music producer. I can't think of anyone who has more of an iconic story and career as him. He was in the military, and then he went to Memphis after serving, and he ended up as the lead engineer at Sun Studios. And so was the guy, like, putting mics around the room and recording Elvis and all the early Johnny Cash stuff and Jerry Lee Lewis.
Insane.
And he produced some of those sessions. And then and him and Johnny Cash were sort of like lifelong best friends. And then he went down to Texas, and to Beaumont, Texas, and he discovered George Jones. And that kind of got him into the country thing. And then he ended up coming to Nashville. And over the years, he built a studio in his house. And over the years in Nashville, just name somebody, and he produced them and worked with them. And he did Hank Williams albums. He did several reels with John Prine, Emmylou Harris, Alison Krauss, Dolly Parton, Porter Wagner, Chris Christopherson, just name them if they were in Nashville.
Legends.
Yeah. I mean, and he was there for the birth of rock and roll in Memphis. He discovered Charlie Pride and signed him, and he was Townes Van Zant's first publisher in Nashville. Like he was just this center of gravity. He produced tracks on YouTube's Rattle and Hum. So I don't know if you've ever seen the movie. Have you ever seen the movie Rattle and Hum by U2?
I haven't seen the movie. I know the record.
Documentary. Yeah. So there's a documentary, and there's this whole section where they go back to Sun Studios, and they want to cut songs in the studio where Elvis worked and where all these legendary people worked. And so they called Cowboy, and he drove down to Memphis, and he produced those sessions alongside Jimmy Iovine and U2. There's like Angel of Harlem and Hawk Moon, and like a lot of the songs they cut and they filmed it, so you can see him working there. So Jack he was this legend, and he was a songwriter, he was a producer, he was a businessman, all the things that I was aspiring to be, and so he was a huge hero of mine. And so I just like convinced this person, this artist manager that I had gotten to know in town, to give me his phone number under like pain of death that I wouldn't tell him it was them that gave me his number.
Okay.
And so I promised, and I got the number, and I just called him up one day. I cold called him, and somebody answered, and Clement Vision is what they called his company. So, they answered Clement Vision, and I asked for him, and luckily for me, they put him on the phone.
Wow.
And I said, you don't know me from anybody. I'm just this indie up and coming songwriter here in town. I told him about the show, and I asked him if he would consider playing it. And I expected him to politely say no and hang up the phone, but he said, well, why don't you come over and let's talk about it this afternoon around 5:00.
Come over to your house?
Yeah. So I showed up at this guy's house, and his wife let me in the door, and it was like stepping back in time into this amazing like museum of music, just like big pictures on the wall of him with all these artists and the shag carpet and
gold records, probably.
Oh, dude, yeah, it was amazing. And he was sitting in his office, and we sat there for 2 hours and drank coffee and listened to records. And at the end of the time we hung out, he said, "Yeah, kid, I like you. I'll do your show."
Whoa.
And so obviously the show sold out, immediately. John Prine was sitting in the front row.
That's crazy. So he brought some of his buddies along with him.
Yeah, it was just they were like, "Oh, Jack's doing a thing. Let's go down and watch it." Right? I mean, so because it wasn't every day that he went out and performed somewhere. Like this kind of. So for me, it was a huge deal.
Yeah.
So we do the show, and the next morning, his partner called me up and said, "Hey, can you swing back by the house today?" So I said, "Of course, I'll come right now." And I went into his room, and Jack was sitting in his bedroom watching the news, having a cigarette. And he had this yellow legal pad, and he was writing on it. And I just kind of sat there for a minute, and he tore a couple pages off of it and folded them up, stuck them in my shirt pocket, and was like, "Here, come with me." And we walked upstairs to his studio up above the house in the attic. And he asked me if I was interested in doing a record there and having him produce it.
Whoa.
And he was like, "I really thought last night's show was special, and if you can bring that same backing band, I'd love to produce some of your songs." And
wow.
So that was like November of 2010, and we started 2 weeks later. Got the same band back together. We cut live in his studio, and it was like traditional style country, right? We had grand piano, pedal steel, drums, upright bass. Acoustic guitar and vocals, and we cut all the tracks. We started mixing in early 2011, and then in May 2011, I was coming out of a movie theater with my partner and son, and there was voicemail on my phone telling me I needed to get over to Jack's because his house was on fire. And I ran over there, or drove over there, and got the police to let me through. They closed off the block, but his house burned to the ground, and his studio and all of the reel-to-reel tapes from going back decades from all those sessions with all those legends just all went up in smoke.
My gosh.
So the record was lost. And then the next year in 2012, I started and launched my startup company, Artist Growth. tech company. And I got deep into that, and I was still going and hanging out with Jack every few days. I'd go sit on his porch with him and we'd talk. And it wasn't until 2013, early 2013, that his engineer called me and said, Matt, we took some of those hard drives from the rubble of the fire, because I was there the next day helping him carry all the burned shit out of the house. And
Sure.
We had this big box of hard drives that we found that were all like dented and soaking with water and charred and melted. And some of them had metal casings, and while they were pretty melted, and they sent them all off to like a data recovery.
Yeah, to see what they can get off of them.
Yeah, they basically, what they did is they went in a clean room and they disassembled them and then rebuilt them, and they kept the little memory plate, the little glass memory plate or whatever in the middle, and they rebuilt a new drive around it. Anyway, he calls me and he's like, we got like a handful of albums back, and yours is one of them, and we have all the original tracks. Even though we lost all the overdubs, we have the original session.
Wow.
So do you want to come back in and finish the album? And so I did. I did. That year we went back in, and in the meantime, I had written a song for Jack that I played him on his porch about the fire, called Out of the Ashes, which ended up being the title track. And so we went in and we cut Out of the Ashes, and John Prine sang on it with me. And then we cut this song Jack had published many, many years ago called We Must Believe in Magic. And anyway, it became this thing. And then later that year he passed away. And I was so busy with my startup that I just, I couldn't put it out, because I was thinking to myself, I can't tour. I can't support this right now. I got to run this company. And whenever I do put this out, I need to be able to support it and like really promote it. And I was naively thinking like, oh, I'll have my startup built and somebody will come and buy it in a couple of years. Here I am 8 years later, still running it. And so by 2017, it was like, fuck it. I just need to put it out. And so even though I can't tour, I just released it then. So that's a long way of giving you the background as to why it took me
quite a story. Wow.
7 years to put it out. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Like
it was a life-changing thing.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. That. Oh, wow. Like you telling that story just like gave me chills. Like that's so crazy. And the fact that they were able to recover that record, was it like, you said you had the original take from the session. Were the overdubs like, did you change anything when you went back in the second time, or were you trying to like
backing vocals? Like we did some overdub work with some additional like we brought in and like overdubbed some B3 on a couple songs, because we didn't have a B3 when we were laying it down. So like stuff like that. Horns, there was one song that we had overdubbed some horns on. Like, so that's the kind of stuff we got lost. The lead vocals and the backing band was all there because we cut all that live.
Wow. That's incredible that they were able to retrieve that for you. That's nuts.
And even more importantly than mine, there was like a dance album, because Cowboy was also a classical dance instructor for many years, so he like knew all these. Yeah, dude, this guy was amazing. If you do yourself a favor, you can go on Amazon. I think you can still buy it. There's a documentary that was made about him, by him. And it's called Shakespeare Was a Big George Jones Fan. And it's all about Jack, and it's a truly stunning piece of work. And what's fascinating about it when you watch it, and this is how ahead of his time this guy was, right? I mean, here he is in Sun Studios at the birth of rock and roll.
Right, tracking Elvis. Like what?
And then yeah. And then years later, he's in Nashville, and he's like the ringleader of this Nashville burgeoning Americana circuit. He's like the guy who's producing everybody. But everywhere he went, he had somebody following him with a video camera filming.
Interesting.
And so there's just like, he had a whole pool house out by his pool that was just filled with video. And so here's a guy that in like the 70s and 80s is vlogging before the internet even exists.
Sure.
Right? Like he's talking into the camera, he's making all these, they called it home movies back then, but it had him in the studio. He would go into award shows, like somebody behind him, like filming it. Like he would go into business meetings with people, and somebody's sitting in the room filming. Like he just filmed his life, like so much of his life. And the reason he did it is because he was a storyteller, and he was fascinated by the medium that video could be to tell stories, I think. And
Yeah.
so he's so ahead of his time.
That is
So ahead of his
so
time.
ahead of his time. That's
You know,
crazy. Especially
if he,
having to keep the tape back then. I mean, it's not like it's
dude,
on a little one of these little SD cards. It's like
yeah.
you got to have the full on tape and wow.
Yeah, so
Eh,
he was just amazing, and being around him and getting to soak up all of that perspective and all of that vibe was just truly one of the. I'm so lucky that I got to be around him so much in the last few years of his life.
That is so amazing.
But watch that documentary; it'll blow your mind.
I was just gonna say, I think tonight that's gonna be something that my wife and I are gonna watch, especially right before as we get ready to come out there tomorrow. So very
Dude,
exciting.
totally.
Yeah,
Yeah, if you
definitely.
really like, Cowboy Jack Clement is a massive, massive part of the fabric of Nashville music history.
Mhm.
But the thing is he's not that well known outside of Nashville.
That's interesting.
So most people I meet, they're like, I've never even heard of this guy. And once I tell the stories, they're like, holy shit, how have I never heard of this guy?
That's what I was thinking when you're talking. Like, I had never heard of him prior to this. I know John Prine, obviously, and a lot of the people, everybody's worked with, everyone you're talking about, but I'd never.
He was the behind the scenes guy. I mean, and he owned a studio, he owned a label, he owned a publishing company, like total raconteur Renaissance man.
Sure.
Like to the highest order.
That's crazy.
Yeah, just way cool. Way cool.
Well, you're kind of, following within his footsteps, so to speak. And you have your own company. You said you started the startup. I'd love to hear about your company.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm trying. I mean, he's definitely like my as far as like artist, businessman, entrepreneur goes, like he's one of the stars in my sky that I follow.
Sure.
Artist Growth is a platform. It's like a software company, software platform, and it's utilized mostly by record companies and management companies to organize and manage all of the daily activity around promo and marketing and touring, and so it's like a back office cloud solution that's really custom tailored for label workflows and management company touring workflows. And we've grown it. We've been growing it for the last 7 or 8 years, and we've got relationships with all the labels under the Universal umbrella in North America and Warner Music and
That's
and a
amazing.
bunch of.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was just gonna ask, like how did the idea spark? Was it from touring on your own and everybody trying to figure out money and who's gonna go knock on the guy at the club's door to get your paycheck? And so it was 100%. All kind of that brought you through your own personal experiences.
100%. The first sort of proof of concept app that we put out was really aimed at musicians like us who are independent and struggling to get by and needed a way to get better organized. To start actually running their career like a business, until you could get well established enough to have a manager do it for you or a team around you. And it there's a need for it for sure. And we were living that need, but it was really obvious early on that if we were going to make money and be a viable business, like we were going to have to scale it up and actually be able to do deals with businesses and not just rely on independent artists. Because when you're an independent artist, you have to prioritize where you put what little money you do have from your day job. And most of that has to go into like gear, gas, merch, studio time, getting merch if you can. And, getting organized is low on the list. Right. You know what I mean? Like business workflow efficiency is not like way up there on the priority list. So it was like, okay, if this thing's going to make it, we got to go like find some professionals who have money that are looking for a tool and have a need for a tool like this. And so it's just been, an up and down, just insane, transformative and incredible journey for the last 8 years building a business.
That's so amazing. And that's amazing that you have the support of like such big, I mean, Universal Music has so many bands. I mean, so does Warner. I mean, it's like you have the spectrum of pretty much everybody. I mean, that's so amazing.
Yeah, it took many years to build a product that was robust enough for those guys to really start to utilize it.
That's so, I mean, congratulations. That's such an accomplishment, man. That's amazing.
Thank you. It's been it's a passion project. And what's exciting is 2021, we're going to drop some really kick-ass products that I think are going to be really impactful, not just for established artists, but for that original audience that we also set out to serve of independence. And so I'm really excited. This is kind of a full circle year for me.
That's amazing.
related to artist growth. Yeah.
That's very cool. With that though, like, is it going to be, because right now, I mean, it's unfortunate because no one's doing the touring. So I'm sure you've had some time to kind of tweak and develop what, what the
Yeah.
future holds, so to speak.
Yeah. 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 This is going to be cool. It's not so much around touring, and efficiency. It's really just about like, you know, giving artists and creators of all stripes, sort of a foundation to build a business from.
Amazing.
That's really all I can say about it right now. But I'm excited about it.
I can't wait to hear everything about it once it all unfolds. That's amazing. And I want to talk to you about your new record, South of the Sky. It just came out today, right?
It did, yeah.
Congratulations. Amazing release day today.
Yeah, thank you.
I listened to it earlier. I love it. I love the song Ghosts of the Old Revolution. That chorus I love it, man. It's so good.
Man. Thank you.
Talk to me about this record. Like, obviously you put out the other one in 2017, but it had been years. Like, were these songs that you had been writing over the course of the past, 10, 15 years?
Some of them. Yeah, some of them. And sometimes, it'll take me a few years to finish a song. I've got songs I'm working on now that some I started a few weeks ago and some I started in college.
Wow.
And I just still tinker with them. It's like having I liken it to like having a compost heap, and once you get something started, you kind of throw it on the compost heap and you can come back to it and it's decomposed a little bit since you last touched it, and it's merged with some of the other things on the heap. And so you've got this new thing, and then it kind of goes off in a different direction. And I always do that. I never ever say like, this is trash, I'm done with it. I just throw it on the compost heap and let it stew with everything else. And eventually, mushrooms grow out of it. Now you have something totally new, and that's what inspires you. So I'm constantly working on songs from all periods of my life.
Mm-hmm.
And South of the Sky, I guess it was 20, I don't remember the year I decided I'd always wanted to make a concept album. I'd listened to like, the first time that the idea of a concept album like really connected with me was when I sat down and started studying Phases and Stages by Willie Nelson, which is just an amazing album. It's a perfectly executed album in every way, I think. And I think he recorded it in Muscle Shoals. And it's one of those albums where there's an A side and a B side, and each of them, like the A side is from the album's about a breakup or a divorce. And I think the A side is like from either the man or woman's perspective, and the B side is from the other one's perspective.
Oh, interesting.
And so they're all interrelated. And so it was like that, I found that to be really inspiring. And then I started studying concept albums, and there's been so many, and there's been some really great ones. So I always wanted to try it because it's such a big undertaking if an album isn't just a collection of songs, but it's actually one body of work that is threads of imagery and meanings that all weave through the whole playlist. It's like that was always something that was real inspiring for me to think about trying to do. And so it took me a long time to really start to pull it together, mostly because I'm running a startup company. And so I was only able to work on it, in my spare time on weekends and at night and just kind of writing. But it was around 2016, I think. It was New Year's Eve on going into 2016 that my friend Rolly, who produced it, I was over at his house and we were all sitting around a bonfire or whatever, toasting in the new year. And he was like, dude, let me help you like unpack this idea and like really get into it. So we started doing pre-production demo tapes that spring in 2016. And him and I have just kind of been like tinkering away on it. And then I was like, all right, I got it done. I got it written. And we started doing principal tracking, I think in 2018 or 2019. And it was like a 2-year thing where we would go hard for like a week and then I wouldn't be able to touch it again for a few months, and we'd go hard for a week again. And finally it's done.
It is out.
Yeah.
Did you always have the concept for the record?
No, that sort of emerged as I was pulling songs together. And, once that revealed itself to me that this was what this album was going to be about, that's when I started like editing the hell out of all the songs, because I found ways to interlace them with each other. And it was like an image from this. It was like, oh, I could bring that image back here in this track later on in the album. And it'd be,
Oh, sure.
so it was like, once I understood what the bigger piece was, I went into like a massive editing phase of the lyrics that didn't stop until, during the mastering of the album, after it was even mixed. I was still sending in saying, hey, I got to re-sing this line because I've changed the words. And
Oh, wow.
so it was pretty wild. Like right up to the end, I was still tweaking it.
That's interesting. Did you record it in that room you're sitting at, or did you like rent a studio? Like where'd you put the record together?
I recorded all the electric guitar parts in here.
Wow.
So this rig that you see over here, I've built over the years, acquiring pieces of gear little by little. And I had a guy in town help me like wire it all up into this one giant MIDI controlled monster.
Oh, sure.
And it's got some Kempers in there, which are like amp simulators. And so I could play late at night with my children asleep and not wake everybody up. I could track.
Oh, yeah, because you can change the tones, or you can use different like amps, like plug-in amps and stuff. Is that what you mean?
Yeah. So Kemper built this beautiful thing that like perfectly simulates and creates an audio profile of any kind of amp. And you got to like mic the actual amp and run it through this algorithm. But then you have that sound and you can dial it up and you just plug it direct into an XLR input on your preamp. And
wow,
you've got a 1960s, Vox.
That's crazy.
AC30, and then you can click a switch, and now you're playing a Fender Champ from 1955. It's dope.
That is so rad. It's
like so I did that
you do
here.
That Logic with different like compressors and stuff. You can like choose this, like like certain compressors and different things. That's amazing. The technology these days, it's so crazy.
Yeah, it's rad, dude. It's rad. And
that is so cool.
So anyway, I did the guitars here. We tracked the drums and bass and acoustic guitars and like got the rhythm section done at Zach Brown's studio, Southern Ground, before it closed down.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And then the pandemic hit. And so we sort of finished the vocals at my friend Rolly's home studio while it was actually being built. So it was a construction zone, cinder block walls, concrete floors, like scaffolding and shit in the room. And that's where we tracked all the final vocals for the album.
That's cool. Well, so you could say that you probably had the first recordings in there.
Oh, dude, yeah, we like got spray paint cans and tagged the walls with all the names of the songs on the album before the drywall went up.
That's awesome. Were you able to take some photos of it?
Yeah, oh yeah. I mean, all the artwork,
the South of the Sky that's tagging the cover, is that from there?
That's the wall of his studio in the construction zone where we cut all the vocals.
That's awesome.
And so if you look in Spotify or wherever, all the singles that we put out leading up to today, it's a different song name spray painted on the walls, and then just a shadow of me doing like different hand gestures and stuff, kind of to go along with each song theme. But that's all like in his studio. We just spray painted the wall, and I was like, man, hell with it. I'm just gonna make it the album cover. What the hell?
That looks cool, man. It reminds me of like Boys Don't Cry, like The Cure, where he's
right, yeah.
Kind of gives me, but that's so sick. That's like really the wall that you guys were in the studio of. That's so cool.
For sure. Those are just iPhone pics of like right after we did the spray paint, we like held up a flashlight and took a picture with an iPhone.
Really? Wow. Yeah. That looks incredible. That's incredible.
That's cool.
So, the record's out today. Are you planning, like, how are you going to support it? I mean, it's a weird time.
It is. And it is an interesting time. And I wonder, I spend a lot of time thinking about where things are going for artists because I run a company that is a technology software company who services the entertainment and music industry. I'm an artist myself. And so like with this album, I'm asking myself these questions, like, how am I going to promote it, tell the story about it? And, one of the trends that seems very real to me for artists is that, and this is something I'm actually planning on maybe starting my own podcast about this subject, but it seems to me that this identity that music had for so many decades as its own standalone industry that really had its own identity, had its own brand, because of the very unique production process that went into making an album for so many years in the studio, and then the unique manufacturing and distribution supply chain aspect of it that music really owned, and all the expertise on like how to promote it and how to like, that wasn't something that like other industry kind of companies dabbled in. It was like the music industry like really had its own identity. But now that everything's moved fully over into the digital domain, that like digital music is just kind of like blending into this broader digital media world.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like the music industry, in some ways, the lines are blurring between like what was once just this music space is now becoming this, it's just fading into the broader wide angle lens of digital media. And so artists are now being expected to like have YouTube channels and do a podcast or create content across all these different mediums. So the labels and people they work with can monetize all that content instead of just the music, which is fascinating to me because it seems to me that to be a songwriter, an artist these days, you kind of have to be like an amateur filmmaker now. And you kind of have to like, you have to learn all these things. And so I think just from a pure, like, I want to learn standpoint, so I can become a better artist. And as a guy who's making a decision and making a roadmap on a tech company on like what we're going to build and where we're going to invest, I really want to understand what is it like to have to do that. Like if your passion, if you started out like, well, I'm a songwriter and this is how I express myself, is I write songs and I put them out and I go play them for people. It seems to me that we're moving in a direction where like, that's not enough anymore. You have to do these other things. You have to like be on Instagram and be constantly filming yourself to talk about things. You have to be on YouTube. So I think what I want to do is experiment with that and learn for myself, like, well, what is it like to have to try to maintain a YouTube channel? And what do you talk about if you're a musician on YouTube? And what do you talk about on Instagram? And so I'm probably going to like really start dabbling with these other mediums and going, you know, what's this experience like for a songwriter and I can't tour. And so it leaves me really no other option than to see what these platforms like YouTube and podcasting and things like that can do for creating a community around your artistic vision. And ultimately, I think that's what all the challenge all artists are going to have. And the real question they're all going to have to ask themselves and are already asking themselves. And if they're not, they're on a label, their label is asking them, you know, how are you going to build a community around your ideas and your visions, and whether it's your music or your podcast or whatever, how are you going to build a community online that will stay engaged with what you're putting out there in the world? And I think now more than ever, it's about who people are, which is fascinating because, you know, in the world I grew up in, you fell in love with someone's music and you didn't know anything about them.
Right.
And most of the time when you did meet somebody whose music you adored and you got the chance to like bump into him somewhere and meet him, you kind of came away from it being like, what an asshole. You know, like,
never meet your heroes, they say, right?
Yeah, right. And you kind of, you're so sad because like you hold them up on a pedestal and then you meet them and you're not thinking like every single place they go, people bombard them. And so of course they kind of were standoffish and a little rude to you because they're just trying to be human beings and they want to be left alone.
Right.
And so you get this bad taste in your mouth and it's like, but now it's like the opposite. It's like people expect to know you and they want to be let in and they want you to like constantly give them who you are, not just your songs or not just your poetry or your fiction. Like they want to like connect and it's about the person. And I think that's fascinating. But it creates a very special challenge for the artist because, you know, it's a whole idea of like scale in business. Like, how do you scale something? You know, we're having a one-on-one conversation. A business is going to ask you, well, how do you take a one-on-one conversation and turn it into a 1 to 1,000,000 conversation? And, you know, going from playing, you know, coffee shops to arenas is one way to do that. Another way to do it is on YouTube or on Twitch or, you know, so it's fascinating to me. I think like, where is it going when an artist, a musician is no longer expected to be a musician, but they're expected to be like content creators across all media formats. And then in doing that, they have to find what their platform is going to be to like really let people in, preserve their own like privacy, and at the same time connect with a large community if they want to make enough money to live and raise a family. So it's just a wild, wild, wild time to be an artist.
Yeah, and the game has totally changed. I mean, it's almost reverse now. Like, you probably know more than I do as far as this, but I'm sure like I don't really see major labels and they're not really in the business of developing artists much anymore. If they can just go on Spotify and be like, oh, well, this guy's unsigned and he has 10 million streams on a song. What's his deal? Right? Because they can see numbers in real time.
For sure. And, you know, the other thing is the turnover. And I know it's different in every genre, you know, like Taylor Swift is an amazing example of like,
I love her to death.
Oh, dude, huge fan. I'm a huge fan.
I have two things behind. The one thing I always tell this is like the most prized possession I have is it's signed Taylor Swift thing.
Oh wow, wow, right on.
Yeah,
dude, she's fantastic. But like a great example of an artist whose genre lends itself to longevity, because there's the people who come to her like it's about her songwriting, it's about what she's saying, it's about who she is and like what she's putting out into the world. Whereas other genres and other types of music, it's more about the vibe than the artist. Mm-hmm. And so like this artist is like famous right now because they're laying down a killer vibe, but like the listener doesn't really care if it's that artist or another artist who's giving them that same vibe. And I think you see a lot of that in other genres where like the turnover is crazy.
Oh, right.
And so I wonder, in the mind of a label or other investors in music, like, are they even thinking long-term anymore? Like, are most investors just going, well, this is what's popular on Spotify right now. We can get the most amount of streams in the shortest period of time. And we can sign 50 people and just turn them over. Like sign is like, hey, you're single. And if it's not popping, bye-bye. And you throw somebody else in. And there's this whole idea of like investing in an artist who's building a long-term community. Like, are people even thinking about that anymore? And if so, which genres are they thinking? Maybe country is still thinking like that. Maybe pop is too. I mean, I don't know. These are all questions that I like desperately want to ask people in the industry. Like, where is it even going? Like, do people even need to be thinking about how to build partnerships with the industry? Or should they be thinking, I'm going to build the largest community I can online, and then I'll be able to make enough money from that to get by. And from there, I can make decisions about who I want to partner with, and potentially sign away some of the rights to my work. Like, I don't know why an artist would ever give away the rights to their work, unless somebody was writing them a check big enough to set them up. Because you don't need any help to build a huge following on YouTube or Twitch, or, I mean, it's being proven by teenagers all over the world.
Yeah, every day.
Every day. And so if you've got something to say, and you're compelled to share what's on your heart and your music or whatever your vision for the world is, you have the tools. If you're willing to buy a $1,000 camera, you can do it in ultra high def 4K from your bedroom and connect and start to build that community. You know, so it's just, the whole thing's fascinating. The whole thing is fascinating.
I completely agree.
And I think there's still some of that in a lot of artists, like that whole like rock star mentality where it's like, man, I just don't want to think about the business. I just want to make the art, and I don't want to have to like concern myself with any of those things. And that's why I want a label. And it's like, I fear for those people, because if that's your attitude, you're probably never going to get a business deal with somebody. And if you do, it's going to be one that seriously fucks you over.
Yeah, you're going to get so taken advantage of. Exactly.
Yeah, for sure. You know, and that's another reason why I really admire Taylor Swift, because she knows the value of her own self and her own drive and her own work and her own talent. Like, she fully understands the value of that. Before her, Dolly Parton is a great example of that. Like, a woman who will not be pushed around, will not be taken for granted, knows her own innate value and is willing to fight for it. And there's dozens of examples of that throughout the industry, men and women. And I just, you know, it's just a fascinating time. So I'm going to start playing around with some of these platforms and try to learn as much as I can about what that's like, and you know, see where it goes. Luckily for me, I feel for me personally, I made a decision that I'm really happy with, in that becoming an entrepreneur, I found in launching a technology business that the process of building a product, in my case, a software product, is very, very similar to building an album. And it scratches the same itch, and it uses all the same muscles, so to speak, that I use when I'm writing songs. It's a creative process. And building a business is an equally creative process where you have to solve problems and think through things and trial and error and adapt in real time. And you're on the line, you're vulnerable. It's a really enlivening, engaging experience. And so I made a decision, since I enjoy this so much, I feel confident that I can start businesses and keep myself employed, or add value at other companies, so I don't ever have to rely 100% on my art to feed my children, which frees me up to be, to make insane concept albums like South of the Sky, where it's like, I never once thought for a half of a millisecond, what are the commercial implications going to be if we do this with the bridge? Will radio still play it? Like, that never entered my mind. Like, I didn't care. This was like, I want to go as far out there in the left field as I can and make the craziest concept album with the weirdest sounds. And let's just go crazy. And I had that freedom because I wasn't worried about, like, is this going to be commercially viable? And I feel really lucky that I don't have that pressure on my art like a lot of people do. And they're having to figure out, this is how I'm going to pay my bills. And that's a lot of pressure to put on your artistic process. And I admire people who go after it, especially the ones who go after it with kids these days. Like, it's like, wow, it's amazing. And me, when I made my decision, that was back when it was like, YouTube was still early days and nobody was really making a living on YouTube yet. So everybody was like, well, if you're going to make money, you got to tour. And I was already doing like 120 days a year on the road. And I was like, wow, I've got kids now. Like, I don't want to be gone. If I succeed and if I start growing a business, like, I'm going to have to tour more. And what's life going to look like if I'm gone 200 days a year to make 100 grand a year, 150 grand a year, 75 grand a year, whatever it is I could pull out, and I'll never see my kids.
Right.
And like, what is that what I want?
Is that worth it? Right.
Yeah. So I said, no, it's not what I want. But I'm not going to quit making music. And then I found out, the beauty about entrepreneurialism is you control your calendar. I don't have to report to work at 8 a.m. and stay there till 5. Like,
right. You don't have to call your boss.
No. As long as I get my work done and the business is growing, I'm in charge of when I do what. If I want to work at night, I can work at night. If I want to work early in the morning, if I want to, make coffee and write songs all morning one Thursday, I can. So it becomes about discipline and time management. And like, I think that is going to be the key word for artists in 2021 and beyond, is discipline. And those who are able to adhere to whichever path they choose in order to create their community and their art, they can apply discipline to it and consistent discipline, they will succeed. And I think the people who won't succeed or will succeed to a lesser degree and struggle more are the people who don't develop the muscle of discipline, and rely on fate and luck for that magic moment to happen. That's going to be a hard path to not get lost in the jungle, I think.
Sure. Especially now with the amount of content that's being put out every day, and everybody's got a YouTube channel and everybody's got an Instagram page. It's just and anybody could record their own stuff at home nowadays. It's just like everything is changing and it's all moving so quickly. And especially with like TikTok, these artists are coming out of that just because somebody did some dance move to their song, and it's like, now it's on the radio and they've never even played a show, and it's something they've built in their computer like 2 weeks ago. It's just mind blowing.
It is mind blowing, and
Really?
and the one thing that all of my mentors in entrepreneurialism have said to me, the one thing I hear all the like really big YouTubers say on their channels, the one thing I hear all the elite runners that I follow because I run, the one thing they all say is it's layer by layer by layer by thin layer upon thin layer, consistently laid down over time. That's what gets you there. That's what gets you the strength and the fitness to carry on and not get hurt. That's what gives you the strength and the fitness to put out content regularly that people can rely on. And they all say, don't expect anything in the first 2 or 3 years. Like, you have to be willing to constantly train and constantly get better and invest in yourself and your craft and your storytelling and your abilities every single day, little by little by little by little. And eventually, if you do that and you're, putting out anything of any kind of like value, then people will come eventually and the algorithms will catch up to you eventually. But it's daunting, man. It's super daunting, to write songs and put them out, and low streaming numbers, to put up YouTube videos and low view numbers. And we've been so put in this world of like, if you don't have huge followings and tons of likes and tons of streams, like, then you don't have value. And that's such bullshit. And I think so many artists quit early because they can't show the likes and they can't show the streams. And so they just feel decimated and they quit.
Yeah, it's sad. It's like you're constantly being judged like in real time. I mean, our 12-year-old son's on TikTok all the time, and it's like, he'll say, oh, that person only has like 5 million followers. And I'm like, 5 million followers? Like, do you understand that that's more people that live in the entire county of San Diego? Like, that is so many people. And like those numbers are like, oh, I'm like 100,000. Like, that's massive. It's crazy.
It's crazy. Don't even get me started. Like, the way our kids see the world because of that, it's same with money. They're like, it's just 100K. And it's like, just 100K?
Right.
That's like, a lot of money. And they're like,
understand how like, hard people have to work to get 100K.
Yeah. Like, you're not just going to get 100K. Like, somebody doesn't just give you that. Like $1 million. Like, it's crazy.
No, totally. And it's funny that you brought the money up thing, because he does that too, where it's like, because it's the YouTubers that will go out and be like, all right, today I'm gonna like burn $100,000, and or like, I'm gonna find 5 people on the street and give them $10,000. It's like, that's rad. I'd love to be one of the 10 people I ran into that day, but like, is that reality? I mean, no.
Yeah, totally. And were they all his friends? And was that Monopoly money? Like, you never know. You never know. And some of them, it is real. And it's like, yeah, but dude, that's the exception. That is not reality.
Right. There's like a 1.1% of the YouTubers that can go burn $1 million if they wanted to. But
oh yeah. I mean, and it's like, dude, that Lamborghini, like that 17-year-old I was like, that shit was rented for this video.
Right.
Like, they had to take that shit back to the rental agency at the end of the day. Right. You know what I mean? Like, he does not own that Lamborghini. Look at the house. Look at where it's parked in the driveway. Like, that car does not belong to that person. He's like, yeah, it does. He said, and it's like, dude, no. No.
Yeah, it's just the perspective now is just so far out there. It's wild. It'll be interesting.
It is wild.
Be interesting. But man, what you just told me was like some of the greatest advice I've ever heard. But it's funny because I was just about to ask you if you have any advice for aspiring artists. I don't know if you could add on to that. Man,
I would say, and it's funny because I've had talks with similarly, like going down to our entrepreneur center and like working with first-time entrepreneurs that are at the beginning of their journey. And I tell them the same thing I would tell an artist right now, which is do not expect quick success, and expect to get beat up, and expect to be the person who beats yourself up the most. Like, you're going to get beat up by yourself the most, and all of your self-doubt is going to get exposed. And you have to reach down inside yourself and find the commitment and the strength to recognize how and figure out and recognize how your self-doubt works. Because everybody doubts themselves in unique ways. We all have different backgrounds. We all have different stories. And because of those experiences, we're going to doubt ourselves differently. And we all have a different Achilles heel. And so one of the things I say is like, do the work to understand how your self-doubt comes at you so you can identify it. Because if you don't, you're going to constantly be in this like spin cycle, like a washing machine, or like rough seas where you're getting knocked around and not really understanding where it's all coming from, when it's really mostly coming from you. And that gets exhausting. And so if you learn how to understand how your own self-doubt attacks you and comes at you, And when you're most vulnerable to it, is it when you haven't eaten, or is it when when you're hungover, like when a certain relationship encounter happens? Like, when are you most vulnerable to that? And you learn those patterns, gives you such leverage and so much solid ground to stand on when you find yourself questioning what you're doing and why you're doing it, and if it's going to work or you're not getting the result you want. So important. And so that's the first thing I would say is like, really know thyself. And it's with particular emphasis on how you attack yourself and how your self-doubt comes at you. The second thing I would say is expect like yourself to have to develop a discipline, layer by layer by layer, and every day, not just like every week. And you don't have to put out a new single every day or a new album every day or a new YouTube video every day, because your content's going to suck if you do it that often. Eventually your content's going to suck. But you can make portions of videos every day. You can write every day. You can take walks and go look for cool B-roll every day. Because what you're doing in the times where you make the stuff that you don't end up putting out is you're honing your craft. And the instruments you use to do it. So whether it's playing guitar or filming and like we were talking about, you have to do all of it. So on Mondays, go out and like film B-roll in your neighborhood. On Tuesdays, play your guitar. On Wednesdays, write a poem. On Thursdays, make a YouTube video. Rinse, wash, and repeat. Like, do all of that over and over and over and over again. Whatever you end up deciding to actually share with the world is one thing, but consistently applying yourself to your craft is going to make you a master of your instruments. And then when inspiration strikes, you don't have to worry about like, well, I need to get better at filming real quick, or like, I need to be a better guitar player. I was telling somebody recently, like who was asking me about this, I said, when I was in the studio laying down tracks on South of the Sky, at no point in there was I thinking like, oh, I need to be like figuring out how to be a better guitar player right now. It was, I'm focusing in on the moment and what's happening and just trying to call upon my talent and my skills as best they existed at the time. But then I came home and a lot of the work that I'm doing like ends up being, I may be trying to write a song, and even if I don't get there, it's making me a better guitar player, just doing it over and over again. So when the inspiration strikes, I have command of my tools and I can perform to the moment. That's number two. And number three is, give it time. Give it time. And make sure you are putting yourself at the feet of people who've gone ahead of you and are further along than you. Whether you can sit with them in person or watch their YouTube videos or watch interviews they've given, people who are further along in the journey than you, sit at their feet, so to speak, watch their videos, listen to their conversations they've had like this with people, and take it to heart and learn. Because the people who have already done it, you've got to learn from them, and you've got to figure out how to say, okay, well, that's what worked for them. That's what they did. What's my version of that? So that comes down to me, that boils down to humility, is be humble enough to learn from people, even if you don't do what they do or like their art. Like, you may fucking hate their art, but the fact of the matter is they're further up the road than you on the same journey you're trying to the same race you're trying to run. So listen to what they did, because there's lessons there that will apply to you. Even if one guy makes hip hop and one guy writes country, those lessons will apply because there's mechanics to it. And those mechanics are, for the most part, the same for everybody, irregardless of like artistic genre or medium or whatever. So humility is like the third and potentially most important. Bring it backwards.